Emily Carter was 34 years old, a senior project manager for a construction firm in Charleston, South Carolina, and the person in my family everyone relied on whenever something needed to be organized. My husband, Daniel, had spent 23 evenings comparing resort packages, arranging room assignments, and calling customer service until every detail looked perfect for our annual beach vacation with my parents, my younger sister, her husband, our cousins, and 2 elderly aunts. The only thing he insisted on bringing for himself was the small blue seashell keychain my grandfather had handed me when I was 9. Vacation traditions matter, he'd smiled while clipping it onto our suitcase. Then, at exactly 4:18 p.m., the receptionist looked up from her computer and quietly said, "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. There isn't a reservation under your name." 3 weeks later, that same blue seashell keychain rested silently on a polished oak table while nobody in the room could meet my eyes. What happened that afternoon wasn't really about a missing hotel room. The reservation was only the final page of a story my family had been writing for years, one I had kept pretending was just bad luck instead of a pattern. Looking back now, I can see every sentence leading toward that beach resort, even though I convinced myself for a long time that the ending would somehow be different. In my family, nobody openly admitted there was a ranking system, but everyone understood it without speaking. My younger sister, Rachel, always occupied the center of every photograph, every holiday schedule, every celebration, and every conversation. She never demanded special treatment. She didn't have to. My parents simply arranged the world around her as naturally as setting plates on a dinner table. The nicest guest room belonged to Rachel whenever she visited. Birthday dinners were scheduled around her calendar. Even Christmas morning somehow waited until she arrived, regardless of who else had been awake since dawn. I told myself it wasn't intentional. I repeated that excuse so often it became part of my own thinking. Daniel never believed it. He had a quiet way of noticing things most people ignored. While everyone else praised expensive restaurants or luxury hotels, he remembered practical details. He carried extra sunscreen for my Aunt Linda because she always forgot hers. He packed ginger candies for my father because long drives upset his stomach. He brought folding chairs because my 80-year-old Aunt Rose couldn't stand comfortably for very long. None of those gestures earned applause, but he never expected any. Sometimes I wondered whether kindness came easier to him because he had grown up in a family where appreciation wasn't treated like a limited resource. Before anyone booked the vacation, I checked everything carefully. On March 11, I emailed everyone asking them to verify names, room preferences, and arrival dates. My mother replied, "Looks good." Rachel answered with a thumbs-up emoji. My father wrote, "Confirmed." A week later, during Sunday dinner at exactly 6:45 p.m., I asked again in front of everyone whether every reservation had been finalized. Mother barely looked up from her plate. "Everything's handled," she said before adding her familiar line with a patient smile. "Don't make everything about you." Everyone laughed softly. So did I. That small laugh is still one of the hardest things for me to forgive. The morning we left for Seabrook Shores Resort began at 7:10 a.m. in our driveway. Daniel loaded the luggage into our silver Honda Pilot with the same care he brought to everything else. Each suitcase had a printed luggage tag. Each reservation confirmation was organized inside a blue folder in the glove compartment. Before we pulled away, he tapped the little blue seashell keychain hanging from our suitcase handle. "For good luck," he said with a smile. I smiled back because I believed luck had nothing to do with it. We had planned too carefully for anything to go wrong. The drive took just under 4 hours. We stopped once for coffee near Georgetown at 9:38 a.m., then arrived at the resort entrance at 4:02 p.m. after traffic near the bridge slowed to a crawl. Palm trees lined the circular driveway, and ocean air drifted through the open windows. My parents were already standing near the entrance while the Bell staff unloaded Rachel's luggage. Everything looked exactly as I had imagined. Until it didn't. Inside the bright marble lobby, the receptionist greeted me politely and asked for my driver's license. She typed for several seconds, frowned slightly, then searched again. At 4:18 p.m., she looked up. "I'm very sorry, Ms. Carter. I have reservations for Robert and Helen Matthews, Rachel and Tyler Lawson, and the Anderson family. But I don't have one for Emily Carter. I actually smiled. There must be another confirmation number. Daniel quietly slid our printed emails across the counter. The receptionist compared them with her screen. The email confirmed someone requested a room, she explained carefully. But the reservation itself was canceled 17 days ago. Canceled. The word didn't even sound real. I turned toward my mother. She sighed as though I had interrupted something far more important. We had to make adjustments, she said evenly. Rachel stared down at her phone. What adjustments? I asked. My father cleared his throat. The cousins decided to come after all. So my room disappeared? Mother folded her sunglasses and slipped them into her purse. There weren't enough ocean view rooms. Daniel asked the question I couldn't. So no one thought to tell Emily? Mother gave the same expression she'd worn my entire life whenever she believed I was being unreasonable. Don't make everything about you. The sentence landed harder than the missing reservation. Not because it surprised me. Because suddenly it explained everything. The receptionist looked uncomfortable enough to step away from the desk. Daniel thanked her anyway. He always thanked people doing impossible jobs. For nearly 30 seconds, nobody spoke. Guests rolled suitcases across polished tile. Children laughed near the fountain outside. Somewhere behind us, an elevator chimed. Life continued as though nothing remarkable had happened. Daniel finally picked up our luggage. Is there another hotel nearby? He asked the receptionist. She found a small family-owned motel almost 12 miles away. It wasn't beachfront. It had no balcony, no pool, and only one remaining queen room. We'll take it, Daniel said before I could answer. Not once did he ask my parents to fix what they had done. Not once did he raise his voice. As we carried our bags back toward the parking lot, I glanced over my shoulder. My family was already discussing dinner reservations. No one followed us. No one apologized. And for the first time, I stopped wondering whether being left out had been an accident. I began wondering how many years I had mistaken deliberate choices for unfortunate mistakes. The motel was called Harbor Pines Inn. It sat beside a quiet highway instead of the ocean, with faded white siding, flower boxes that needed fresh paint, and a handwritten sign promising fresh coffee at 6 a.m. It wasn't where we had planned to spend our vacation, but by 5:47 p.m., Daniel had carried our bags into room 112 without complaining once. He set the blue seashell keychain on the small wooden nightstand beside the bed. I still like this view, he said. I looked out the window. The parking lot faced a gas station. There wasn't a wave in sight. Normally, I would have laughed. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, unable to make sense of the afternoon. My phone buzzed twice. The first message was from Rachel. Hope you're settled. Dinner's at 7 if you decide to come over. No apology. No explanation. Just an invitation to pretend nothing had happened. The second message came from my mother less than a minute later. Don't make everything about you. We did what worked for everyone. I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking the phone without replying. Daniel disappeared for a few minutes and came back carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the motel office. They're surprisingly good, he said, handing me one. That simple gesture broke something inside me more completely than my family's betrayal had. Because he kept choosing kindness even after watching people humiliate the person he loved. I should have seen this coming, I finally admitted. He didn't interrupt. I keep telling myself each incident is separate. A forgotten invitation. A changed holiday plan. A birthday dinner moved without asking me. Every time I explained it away. He nodded once. You wanted to believe the best. I helped them. The words surprised even me. I told myself they were busy. That Rachel needed more attention. That mom didn't mean it. Every excuse I made gave them permission to keep doing it. The room fell quiet except for the hum of the old air conditioner. Images began lining up in my mind like photographs finally arranged in the correct order. Age 12. Rachel receiving the bicycle we'd both been promised because there was only enough money for one. Age 17. My college acceptance dinner quietly becoming Rachel's celebration after she'd won a dance competition. Age 28. My promotion dinner canceled because my parents wanted to attend Tyler's company banquet instead. None of those moments had seemed large enough to confront. Together they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. That evening I called my father. He answered on the second ring. I just wanted to understand, I said carefully. Why wasn't anyone honest with me? He sighed. Emily, it's only a room. It wasn't only a room. Please don't ruin the vacation. An hour later, I called my Aunt Linda. She lowered her voice immediately. Sweetheart, I know it wasn't fair. So why didn't anyone say anything? You know how your mother gets. That's not an answer. It isn't, she admitted quietly. But sometimes keeping the peace feels easier. Keeping the peace. I'd heard those words almost as often as don't make everything about you. Both phrases meant exactly the same thing. They asked one person to carry everyone else's comfort. I ended both calls feeling smaller than when I'd started them. Around 8:40 p.m., there was a knock at our motel door. I expected room service or the manager. Instead, it was Aunt Rose. 80 years old, leaning lightly on her cane, she smiled when Daniel opened the door. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. They're wrong. Only 2 words. No excuses. No balancing act. No lecture about family. She reached into her purse, pressed a folded envelope into my hand, and squeezed my shoulder gently. You don't have to keep accepting the seat they saved for you, she said softly. You can choose a different table. For the first time that day, someone had given me permission to stop fighting for a place where I had never truly been welcomed. I barely slept that night. By 6:12 a.m., I was sitting outside Harbor Pines Inn with a paper cup of coffee, turning my grandfather's blue seashell keychain over in my hand. The ocean was 12 miles away, but I could still smell salt in the morning air whenever the wind shifted. Aunt Rose's words stayed with me. You can choose a different table. For years, I had measured my worth by whether my family made room for me. Standing outside that little motel, I realized I had never once asked whether I wanted a seat at a table where I was only tolerated. 3 weeks later, Daniel and I rented the community pavilion at Harbor Point Beach Park, 5 miles south of the resort. It wasn't luxurious. The picnic tables didn't match. Half the chairs had been borrowed from our church. We served grilled shrimp, hamburgers, homemade peach cobbler, and lemonade in paper cups. But every single person who received an invitation had a place reserved before the food was ordered. I almost sent an angry message to the family group chat. I hope the extra ocean view room was worth losing your daughter. I deleted it. Then I typed another. Funny how everyone found space except for me. That disappeared too. Instead, at 8:15 p.m. the evening before our gathering, I sent only this. Daniel and I are spending Saturday at Harbor Point Beach Park with the people who want to celebrate together. If you'd genuinely like to join us, you're welcome. There won't be assigned tables or preferred guests. Just bring yourself. No accusations. No scorekeeping. Just the truth. My mother's reply arrived 7 minutes later. Do whatever you want. Nothing else. Saturday morning, the pavilion slowly filled. Our neighbors arrived carrying watermelon slices. Daniel's parents brought folding chairs. Aunt Rose came wearing the same wide-brimmed straw hat she'd worn to every beach trip for 15 years. Even Aunt Linda quietly appeared with 2 homemade pies. There was laughter. Children collected shells along the shoreline. Someone started a volleyball game that nobody kept score in. Daniel hung a small wooden sign near the entrance. Everyone has a place here. Around lunchtime, my cousin Ben pulled me aside. The resort dinner last month, he said. Honestly, it felt empty. Everyone noticed you and Daniel weren't there, even if nobody admitted why. I simply nodded. I didn't need the comparison anymore. By 2:43 p.m., I noticed a familiar SUV pulling into the parking lot. My parents stepped out. My mother hesitated instead of walking straight toward me the way she usually did. For the first time in my life, she waited. I finished helping Aunt Rose carry a tray of food before walking over. She tried her usual approach. You've made quite a statement. I smiled politely. I invited everyone. She looked around at the families laughing together. Then, much more quietly than I'd ever heard her speak, she asked, Is there still room for us? There is, I answered. But first, I need one thing. She looked relieved, probably expecting money or an apology she could negotiate. Instead, I said, "Not for me." I glanced toward Daniel, who was helping one of the children untangle a fishing line. "You owe him the apology. He spent weeks planning a vacation for people who never planned to include him or me." She didn't answer immediately. Several minutes later, she walked over to Daniel. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. I never moved closer. Some moments belong to the people who earned them. When they returned, Daniel simply nodded once. That was enough. Over the following months, our family stopped booking one giant resort together. Instead, every spring, each household reserved its own room, paid its own bill, and met on the public beach every Saturday morning. No one controlled the guest list. No one assigned importance. The first time my mother arrived, she quietly hung my grandfather's blue seashell keychain on the pavilion hook before anyone else unpacked. She didn't announce why. She simply smiled at me before joining everyone else to set out food. She had finally understood what that little seashell had always meant. Not ownership. Belonging. Looking back now, I don't remember the luxury resort nearly as clearly as I remember Harbor Pines Inn, the community pavilion, for 18 p.m., and the 3 weeks that changed everything. Because being left without a room taught me something my family never could. The people who leave you standing outside may never change, but the life you build after closing that door can become the first place where everyone finally belongs.